All right, we are live. New update to the. Oh, what a timing! My rice cooker. Maybe there was a signal by God to research on rice cookers today, but we got a new Japanese rice cooker. This is a good time to research. Tell me about the business of rice cookers. So for a while, for a couple of days, I've been like cooking rice in a pan. It is fun to experiment, but it is not a system that you can rely on. That's not a good system that you can rely on. So now we have this rice cooker. It is gonna do magic, and we're gonna be eating a lot of rice. I think it's also interesting. Like I've been experimenting a lot. I was experimenting with just a carnivore diet. What happens when you are just going carnivore? You're gonna realize how important carbohydrates are, in general carbs are, because protein can hit your protein consumption or protein thing, whatever, but it's actually bad for you. Like if you're just consuming protein, that's actually bad. You need carbs, because carbs. So what do I remember? I remember that carbs is glucose, so that can give you energy really fast than protein. I also read about the fact that protein, when you just consume protein, I think it's like you're eating your, yeah, it's weird. Like you are consuming a lot of your, you actually, you think that you will grow bigger, but you don't grow bigger. You also feel really hungry because they both are important. You need both of them in equal balance, because see, how do you feel satiated? You feel satiated by having glucose or having carbs, a lot of carbs. Like that's the reason when you eat rice, you eat potatoes, you feel full, but you also need to feel. Yeah, this is actually good. This is something that we can look at, because I don't know. How do you feel satiated? You need, again, a balance of all three of them: rice, or carbs, protein, and your veggies or your fibers. I think it's interesting. It's a good forcing function. Like without learning on nutrition, I kind of went on doing my own experimentation. And now after doing experiment, after like holding, like, I think, yeah, it's so interesting. It's so interesting. It's like balance. Again, you realize the importance of balance. Because just carbs, just protein, there are people who will eat just carbs. There are people who will eat just protein. There are people who will just eat fiber. But none of them are actually, everybody quickly realizes they're missing something, and then they quickly find the balance again. What is the importance of balance in nutrition? What happens when you just eat protein, just eat carbs, or just go for veggies? Let's see. Rice cookers. Market is a fascinating business with some interesting dynamics. The global rice cooker market is valued at roughly 5 to 7 billion and has been growing steadily. So right now we got this brand Zojirushi, very Japanese brand, and I am excited to see the quality of my rice. It actually looks pretty good, so we'll see. The global rice cooker market is valued at roughly 5 to 7 billion. It has been growing steadily, driven by urbanization, busy lifestyles. By the way, what time is it right now? It pretty much took like 40 minutes to cook that rice. I'm spending a lot of time cooking rice. Okay. But it's cool because it's cool. It's a system. I think systems are important. Like every time you do something, it's like coding. I was talking to my dad and I was like, okay, how can I help him understand what is happening with AI? And why the fact that AI has been able to go after coding first is crazy. So why does that mean a lot of progress? Because let's say if you work as a barista at Starbucks, today you had 100 customers, and every time they asked for a coffee, you had to start that process from ground up, and you had to make that coffee. There's none of that process could be automated. Yes, there are some things that have been automated, but a lot of things today are not automated. You are going there, you are doing all those things, and if 100 people come in, they ask for coffee, you have to do that same process 100 times. What happens? And if tomorrow there are 200 people who comes in, none of the work that you did yesterday helps you with kind of laying the foundation that you can do the next day's work faster. You are doing the same work again and again and again every single day. You're doing the same work again and again. What happens in coding is, if today you solved a problem, you can start thinking about how do you automate that so that you can start thinking about a bigger problem. And that's a loop that you are in a constant loop with software engineering. You build something, you test, you explore, you test a lot, you see what's working, you automate that. So then now you can go on thinking about a bigger problem. And that's a loop that you enter in with AI. And that's the reason why we have this we have companies like Recursive AI, and that's their entire goal, that, hey, you go and build models. Every time you explore a lot, experiment a lot, every time you find something that works, automate that, now think about a bigger problem. So that's how you're entering into this recursive loop of constantly improving your AI. So it's pretty much the same thing with the rice. Rice cooker, what is rice cooker? Instead of sitting down and making rice every single time, now I have this rice cooker, and once I made it, I have the system. Once I just do that everything, like rinsing my rice and stuff like that, I put it over here. Now you have a system, because now you can make rice for the next 3 days and put it over here. Put it in the rice cooker itself. And you have skipped that entire individual process that you kept on doing every single time. And maybe that's the idea about meal prep as well. I'm thinking about it, like maybe I am going to get into meal prepping. Why? Because you are saving so much time. Yes, cooking is fun. Cooking is fun. Cooking is actually pretty fun, but you also need to automate the things that can be automated so you can really focus on the things that you want to do. But yeah, let's go over here. Cooking market is roughly 5 to 7 billion, has been growing steadily, driven by urbanization, busy lifestyles, rising demand in both traditional rice eating countries and Western markets. The rice consumption is increasing. Do we have Zojirushi here? No. Cuckoo. Oh yeah, Zojirushi, okay. The industry is dominated by Japanese brands like Zojirushi, Tiger, and Panasonic at the premium end, with Chinese manufacturers like Midea and Super, owned by Group SEB, commanding massive volume in Asia. South Korea's Cuckoo has carved out a strong premium niche. Now I'm smelling rice. This is beautiful. Our home is smelling like rice right now. It's also good, like once you start cooking, your home starts smelling like food, really good food, and that's good. That's pretty good. Carved out a strong premium niche, particularly with pressure rice cookers at the budget end. Brands like Aroma and Instant Pot, which added rice cooking to its multi-cooker, compete on price and versatility. Instant Pot is also something that we keep hearing about. Instant Pot. The premium versus commodity split, where it gets interesting. A basic rice cooker sells for $15 to $30, while high-end Japanese models with induction heating, pressure cooking, fuzzy logic can cost $300 to $600. Wow. Zojirushi's top models exceed $500. The margin story is wow. I know one of my buddies who has a rice cooker which is worth $800. $800. That's crazy. The margin story is completely different at each tier. Premium brands are on craftsmanship, grain-specific cooking algorithms, and the quality of the cooked rice, while budget brands compete on price and distribution. In Japan and South Korea, rice cookers are treated like essential kitchen investments, similar to how Westerners view a good oven, and replacement cycles are 5 to 10 years. Replacement cycles are 5 to 10 years. That makes sense. Then it's totally worth it. It's totally worth it to spend $200 on a rice cooker. Wow. In Southeast Asia, India, and China, the market is more volume driven with lower average selling prices but enormous unit sales. Western markets are still relatively underpenetrated but growing. Technology as a differentiator. Premium brands invest heavily in R&D, fuzzy logic microprocessors that adjust temperature and timing in real time, induction heating for even more cooking, pressure cooking for texture, and even AI-driven cooking profiles. This technology moat justifies premium pricing and creates brand loyalty that's hard to disrupt. I don't know what this fuzzy logic. What is this fuzzy logic algorithm being used for rice cooking? Their tiny, tireless rice whisperer watching steam like a stock trader watches candlesticks. Wow. That whisperer is fuzzy logic, not logic in the strict engineer sense, more like culinary intuition encoded into silicon. Cooking rice is deceptively chaotic because rice types vary, water ratios vary, user error is eternal, ambient temperature changes everything, age of rice changes absorption, voltage fluctuations affect heating. A simple cooker just does heat, boil, stop when water gone, which works, but only when conditions are perfect. Fuzzy logic cookers instead ask, okay, now I'm really curious. I'm gonna taste my rice and see what happens. All right, let's see. Yes, my rice is cooked. My rice is cooked. This is pretty good. I think now we can start testing different kinds of rices to add more flavor, add more taste. That'd be really cool. Okay. This makes sense. Fuzzy logic cookers instead ask, what kind of situation am I in right now? Why fuzzy? Traditional logic is binary. Water present true, water gone false. Fuzzy logic lives in gradients. Instead of is the rice done, it asks, how close to done does this feel? It works with variables like slightly undercooked, almost absorbed, rapid boil phase, approaching gelatinization, not crisp taste, soft states. Oh, not crisp states, soft states, slightly undercooked, almost absorbed, rapid boil phase, approaching a gelatinization. Like how, like how a chef says, give it another minute. What the cooker is actually sensing. Premium rice cookers monitor temperature curve over time, rate of temperature change, steam pressure, heat retention patterns. Example, water boils at 100 as long as free water exists, temperature plateaus near 100 degrees Celsius. Once water is absorbed, temperature starts rising above boiling. A basic cooker waits for the jump and shuts off. A fuzzy logic cooker reads that entire curve. How fast did we reach boiling? How long did we plateau? How sharp was the post-boil rise? That tells it rice type, water amount accuracy, cooking progress. The algorithm, if temperature okay, this is rigid rules. If temperature rising slowly and steam stable, then extend simmer phase slightly. If temperature rising quickly, then reduce heat to prevent scorching. If absorption slower than expected, then add soak time. Heat intensity, cooking duration, resting phase. The real magic, compensation. If you mess up water ratio, a basic cooker punishes you. A fuzzy cooker adapts. Too much water, it dries longer. Too little water, it softens heating curve to prevent chalky grains. Cold kitchen, it increases early stage energy. Old rice adds soak time. Why this matters? This is the moat behind brands like Zojirushi, Tiger, Cuckoo. They aren't selling heat, they're selling judgment. The cooker behaves less like an appliance and more like a sous chef trained on thousands of bowls. Wow, this is interesting. So now I'm really curious. I kind of bought the cheaper Zojirushi. I know some people are buying like $500 Zojirushi. I'm curious what's the difference. Yeah, my buddy was like, yeah, you have to buy the pressure cooker one because that means better. I don't know. Premium brands invest heavily in R&D, fuzzy logic microprocessors that adjust temperature and timing in real time. Pressure cooking for texture and even AI-driven cooking profiles. Include the rice or multi-cookers eating into low-end rice cooker market. Smart connected rice cookers with app control, particularly popular in China via Xiaomi's ecosystem, and growing demand for models that handle diverse grains like quinoa, millet, and brown rice as health-conscious eating expands. The business model for premium players like Zojirushi is remarkably durable. They have built something close to what you might appreciate as a Zojirushi. Very interesting, very interesting. And they have a photo of a nice salmon on their box. All right, great question. Nutritional balance matters because each macronutrient in food group serves distinct physiological roles, and your body can compensate well when one dominates at the expense of others. Protein only or extreme protein dominance, your body can convert protein to glucose through, right, so it's mainly about glucose. Gluconeogenesis, but it's metabolically expensive and inefficient. Without adequate carbs and fats, you risk what's sometimes called rabbit starvation, a condition early explorers documented when eating only lean meat. Rabbit starvation. Yeah, it's a weird kind of starvation where you feel like you have eaten food. You have eaten things, but you are still hungry for something and you don't know what's happening. A condition early explorers documented when eating only lean meat. Symptoms include fatigue, diarrhea, and eventually organ stress. Wow. Your kidneys work overtime processing nitrogen, waste, and without dietary fat, you lose the ability to absorb fat-soluble vitamins. Without dietary fat, you lose the ability to absorb fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, K. Long term, it strains liver and kidney function significantly. Wow, this makes a lot of sense. I did do a blood test and my kidney was a little bit high, or whatever, my urea was a little bit high. Carb only, you'd get energy but lose muscle mass rapidly without protein to maintain and repair tissue. Your body would start breaking down its own muscle for amino acids, essentially cannibalizing itself. Immune function deteriorates because antibodies are proteins. Wound healing slows. Without essential fatty acids, cell membranes degrade. Hormonal production, especially sex hormones and cortisol, gets disrupted, and brain function suffers since the brain depends heavily on omega-3s for structural integrity. You'd also likely experience wild blood sugar swings without protein and fat to moderate absorption. You get energy but lose muscle rapidly without protein to maintain and repair tissue. Your body would start breaking down its own muscle for amino acids, essentially cannibalizing itself. Immune function. I'm really curious about the rapid starvation. Tell me more. Tell me more. Without protein to maintain and repair tissue, your body would start breaking down its own muscle for amino acids, essentially cannibalizing itself. Immune function deteriorates because antibodies are proteins. Wound healing slows. Without essential fatty acids, cell membranes degrade. Hormonal production gets disrupted and brain function suffers since the brain depends heavily on omega-3s for structural integrity. You would also likely experience wild blood sugar swings without protein and fat to moderate absorption. Vegetables only, better than the other two extremes since vegetables offer micronutrients, fiber, and some proteins and carbs. But you'd struggle with caloric density. You would need to eat enormous volumes to meet energy needs. Key deficiencies would emerge in B12, virtually absent from plants. Complete proteins. Most vegetables lack all essential amino acids in sufficient quantities. Iron and zinc. Plant forms are less bioavailable as essential fatty acids. Over months, you would see fatigue, anemia, muscle wasting, and cognitive decline. Wow. The deeper principle is that your body is an integrated system, not a collection of independent parts you can fuel separately. Macronutrients interact. Fat helps absorb certain vitamins. Protein moderates blood sugar response to carbs. Fiber from vegetables feeds gut bacteria that influence everything from immunity to mood. The synergy matters as much as the individual components. There's actually something almost Vedantic about it. The way the whole can be understood by isolating the parts, and each element's function is defined by its relationship to the others rather than its standalone properties. Wow. Wow. Really cool. Really cool. All right. Very, very, very interesting. Rabbit starvation. Let's look into this. By the way, what do we think about this new background? I don't know yet. Rabbit starvation, also called protein poisoning or mal de Cahibu. Rabbit starvation, protein poisoning, is a condition that occurs when you eat almost exclusively lean protein with virtually no fat or carbohydrates. The name comes from the fact that rabbit meat is extremely lean, very low fat content. So early North American explorers, trappers, and indigenous communities observed that people who relied solely on rabbit during harsh winters would become increasingly ill despite eating plenty of food. They would feel perpetually hungry, wow, develop diarrhea, and eventually die if they didn't diversify their diet. Wow. Wow. They would feel perpetually hungry, develop diarrhea, and eventually die if they didn't diversify their diet. Oh my God. Okay. What happens? Your liver can only safely process so much protein at once. The upper limit for protein metabolism is roughly 35 to 40% of total caloric intake. Beyond that, the liver can upregulate urea synthesis fast enough to handle the nitrogen byproducts. This leads to hyperamino acidemia, excess amino acids in the blood, hyperammonemia, toxic ammonia buildup, and eventually nausea, diarrhea, and in extreme cases, death within weeks. Wow. Wow. The liver can upregulate urea synthesis fast enough to handle the nitrogen byproducts. This leads to hyperaminoacidemia, excess amino acids in the blood, hyperammonemia, toxic ammonia buildup, and eventually nausea, diarrhea, and in extreme cases, death within weeks. The historical record is rich with accounts. Arctic explorer Wilhelmur Stefansson wrote extensively about this in the early 1900s. He noted that indigenous Arctic peoples understood instinctively that fat was a critical micronutrient for survival. They would preferentially eat fatty cuts, organ meats, and blubber, and would actually discard lean meat in times when fat was available. Himself participated in a famous year-long experiment at Bellevue Hospital in 1928 where he ate only meat, but crucially high-fat meat, and remained healthy. The distinction between lean only and fatty meat was the entire difference between thriving and deteriorating. Wow. The paradox is striking. You can be eating thousands of calories a day and still essentially be starving. Your body sends persistent hunger signals because it's not getting what it actually needs, fat and carbs, for efficient energy, even though your stomach is full. It's a vivid illustration that calories alone aren't the relevant unit. Your body needs specific molecular blocks, and no amount of one type compensates for the absence of others. Very interesting. Very interesting. What does a perfect, balanced meal look like? Is a bit of a moving target depending on your goals, activity level, and individual biology, but there's a solid general framework most nutritionists converge on. The plate model is the simplest way to think about it. Roughly half of your plate is non-starchy vegetable, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, peppers, tomatoes, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, peppers, tomatoes. About a quarter is quality protein, fish, poultry, legumes, eggs, and the remaining quarter is complex carbohydrates, whole grains, sweet potatoes, brown rice. Whole grains, sweet potatoes, brown rice, then add a modest portion of healthy fats, olive oil, avocado, nuts, either cooked into the meal or as a side. Concrete example, a piece of grilled salmon, a generous serving of roasted broccoli. And spinach salad, a scoop of brown rice dressed with olive oil and lemon. Maybe some seeds sprinkled on top. A single plate covers omega-3 fatty acids, complete protein, fiber, complex carbs for sustained energy, fat-soluble vitamin absorption, and a wide spectrum of micronutrients. What makes it work physiologically? The protein and fat slow gastric emptying. So the carbohydrates release glucose gradually rather than spiking your blood sugar. The fiber feeds your gut microbiome and promotes satiety. The fat enable absorption of vitamins A, D, E, and K from the vegetables. The variety of plant colors generally correlates with different phytonutrient profiles. So eating across the color spectrum isn't just aesthetic advice, it's biochemically meaningful. Wow. So we gotta bring more tomatoes in the mix. Some baby tomatoes in the mix. Okay. The protein and fat slow gastric emptying, so the carbohydrates release glucose gradually rather than spiking your blood sugar. The fiber feeds your gut microbiome and promote satiety. The fats enable absorption of vitamins A, D, E, and K from the vegetables. The variety of plant colors generally correlates with different phytonutrient profiles. So eating across the color spectrum isn't just aesthetic advice, it's biochemically meaningful. Meals are technically healthy but unbalanced. A giant salad with no protein or fat leaves you hungry in an hour. A chicken breast with rice but no vegetables, missing micronutrients and fiber. Or a smoothie packed with fruit but no protein, sugar bomb. Each component in isolation is fine. The balance is the point. The balance is the point. Chicken breast with rice but no vegetables, missing micronutrients and fiber. Or a smoothie packed with fruit but no protein. Each component. Okay, so we gotta add some vegetables in here. Timing and context matter to a meal before intense physical activity might skew toward more carbs. A meal before a long period of focus or fasting might lean more toward more fat and protein for sustained energy. There is no single static formula. The perfect meal adapts to what you are asking your body to do next. The honest truth is that most people intuitively know what a balanced meal looks like. The challenge was never information. It's convenience, habit, and the modern food environment working against you. Tell me more. The modern food environment working against you. This is very important. This is very important. The modern food environment is working towards you. That is true. How do you avoid that? How do you avoid that? Wow. I went from thinking about something. The moment we started, I'm like, this rice cooker went off. I'm like, okay, now let's go into rice cooker. All right, let's see. The modern food environment is essentially an adversarial. I think I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been talking a lot about this, specifically if you are, I definitely think a lot about this because I think I have a lot of friends, and in university especially, I had a lot of friends who, when they got into university, they were already trained. They were trained by the parents about how to make food. When they were growing up, they had the right quality of, they know how to do food, they know how to meal prep, they knew how to do all those things. So it was very interesting to see how they operated. Yeah. You waste so much time just thinking about food and grabbing food because you need food every 3 hours. Yeah. Wow. The modern food environment is essentially an adversarial system when it comes to balanced eating, not by conspiracy, but by the convergence of economic incentives, food science, and human evolutionary wiring. Your biology is outdated. Your brain evolved in caloric scarcity. It's wired to crave sugar, fat, and salt because those were rare and calorically dense. I'm especially thinking about this one friend that I had in my class, and I can see, like, it seemed like, yeah, he had a really good physique while he was in university. So he was like 19 or 20 years old, and he had really good physique. And all right, I found him over here. Yeah, he had really good physique. It seemed like, okay, he came from a place where he already, like, his family already kind of trained him in the right way and with the right foundation, that this is what you're supposed to follow, and he kind of understood that stuff. And yeah, that makes a massive difference. That makes a massive difference when you are built with those systems. I never had those systems, so it's very, very interesting. Very interesting. It's very important to build systems. It's very incredibly important to build these systems, especially starting with food. Once you have that, we can start tackling the other areas that we have. Your biology is outdated. Your brain evolved in caloric scarcity. It's wired to crave sugar, fat, and salt because those were rare and calorically dense. Finding them was a survival advantage. That wiring hasn't changed, but the environment has flipped completely. Now those things are the cheapest, most available options everywhere you look. Your ancient reward circuitry is being exploited by a food landscape it was never designed for. Food engineering is sophisticated. The processed food industry employs serious science to find what they internally call the bliss point, the precise combination of sugar, salt, and fat that maximizes craving without reaching a satiation signal. Howard Moskowitz, one of the pioneers of this approach, helped optimize products for companies like Prego and Dr. Pepper using the same psychophysical methods used in sensory research. The goal is to make food that you keep eating past the point of hunger, what researchers call hyper-palatable. Roughly 60 to 70% of packaged foods in a typical grocery store are ultra-processed and engineered with this in mind. Engineered food. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, sometimes people would also think, like, do we even have time? Do we even have time to think about food when we have work and stuff like that? It's hard. It's really hard. But you gotta do it. You gotta fix it. Roughly 60 to 70% of packaged foods in a typical grocery store are ultra processed and engineered with this in mind. Portion economics push imbalance. It's dramatically cheaper to fill a plate with refined carbs and processed protein than with fresh vegetables and quality fats. It's dramatically cheaper to fill a plate with refined carbs and processed protein than with fresh vegetables and quality fats. $1 of calories from rice, pasta. Yeah, maybe I'll start cooking pasta as well. $1 of calories from rice, pasta, or fast food goes much further than $1 of calories from salmon and broccoli. This isn't a personal failure, it's structural economic reality. Food deserts in lower income areas compound this further. Food deserts. Deserts. Convenience architecture matters. The meals that require the least time and decision making, fast food, delivery apps, packaged meals are almost universally imbalanced toward refined carbs, sodium, and low quality fats. Cooking a balanced meal requires planning, shopping, prep time, and skill. Every friction point is an opportunity for the default, convenient, imbalanced option to win. And modern life keeps adding friction. Longer work hours, decision fatigue, the cognitive load of just existing in an information saturated world. And modern life keeps adding friction. Modern life keeps adding friction. Longer work hours, decision fatigue, the cognitive load of just existing in an information saturated world. Marketing distorts perception. Health halos are everywhere. granola bars marketed as wholesome that are essentially candy. Health halos. I think there's a massive thing that Brian Johnson is going after with AG1, which is also very interesting. So Brian Johnson is good. Brian Johnson is good. He is pushing food to the limits. He's pushing health to the limits. And we can definitely 80-20 that. We can be like, okay, so he is doing this extreme research and we can learn that, okay, so this is his conclusion. And then we can make decisions more carefully. Like I think him talking about AG1 in this way, a lot of people will think about canceling that AG1 subscriptions. Health halos are everywhere. Granola bars marketed as wholesome that are essentially candy. Fruit juices positioned as healthy that contain more sugar than soda. Protein bars that are glorified chocolate bars. Protein bars that are glorified chocolate bars with whey added. The language of health has been co-opted so thoroughly that navigating a grocery store requires genuine nutritional literacy to see past the packaging. Social and cultural defaults have shifted. Eating out used to be occasional, now it's routine for many people. Restaurant portions are typically 2 to 3x what a balanced meal will look like, and they skew heavily towards carb and fat because that's what tastes indulgent and feels worth paying for. The social ritual of eating has been increasingly decoupled from the act of nourishing yourself. The net effect is that eating well in the modern world is essentially a countercultural act. It requires actively resisting the default at nearly every decision point. What's cheapest? What's fastest? What's most available? What your brain is screaming for? The people who eat well consistently aren't exercising more willpower than everyone else. They have typically restructured their environment to make the balanced choice the easy choice. Meal prepping, curating what's in their kitchen, building routines that bypass the daily decision. It's a systems problem masquerading as a personal discipline problem, and that misframing, treating it as individual willpower, is maybe the most insidious part of the whole thing. Tell me more. I think this is the most interesting part. So what is truly happening over here is there is like, even for me, thinking about the fact that I need a rice cooker, thinking about the fact that, okay, make this, the first initial point is where you have a lot of friction, but once you get past that point, then it becomes easier, then it becomes normal. So it is important to it is really important to kind of push past the initial limits. This misframing runs deep and it's not accidental. The willpower narrative serves industry. If poor eating is your personal failing, your lack of discipline, your laziness, your bad choices, then the system that produced those outcomes is absolved. The food industry, agricultural policy, urban planning, workplace culture, none of it needs to change. You just need to try harder. It's the same logic tobacco companies use for decades. We are not the problem. People just need to choose not to smoke. We are not the problem. People just need to choose not to smoke. Again, smoking comes from a social relationship that you have. So I think most people, when they smoke, they are smoking with their friends. They are smoking to de-stress. They think they are de-stressing, and they are smoking with the colleagues or with other people in a place where you want to have conversation and you want something in your hand. So it's more like that. It is a kind of a social tobacco or smoking has been, it's like, oh, when you smoke, you can walk up to someone, you can be like, hey, you got lighter? And that's conversation starter. So that's like conversation starter, and then you talk and then stuff like that. So it's kind of an excuse to connect with people. They have made it that, which is very interesting. And also, I just recently heard that smoking is coming back. Okay. If smoking is coming back, are the cool kids in Brooklyn back to smoking cigarettes? Someone, I think it was Scott Galloway said that. Yeah, that smoking is back. So again, we are going through this pendulum. People were more on the healthy side, no alcohol, nothing, and now some people are like, no, we'll go back to smoking. The individualization of a structural problem is one of the oldest plays in the book, and it works because it maps onto a deeply held cultural belief, especially in North American culture, that outcomes reflect character. Willpower is a finite and unreliable resource. The research on ego depletion, even accounting for the replication debates around Baumeister's original studies, points to something most people recognize experientially. Your capacity to make good decisions degrades over the course of a day. By evening, after a full day of work, decisions, social navigation, and information processing, the idea that you will consistently override your brain's craving for the easy dopamine hit of junk food is fantasy for most people. The system requires you to make the right choice dozens of times daily, indefinitely, with no structural support. That's not a plan, it's a setup for failure. Compared to other system problems we have recognized, we don't tell people to personally filter their tap water and call it a discipline issue. We build water treatment infrastructure. We don't expect every driver to individually calculate safe road design. We engineer roads with guardrails, speed limits, and lane markings, but with food, we have somehow accepted that each individual should navigate an environment engineered against them, using nothing but personal resolve. The asymmetry is staggering when you actually look at it. The shame cycle reinforces the problem. When you frame it as willpower and someone inevitably fails, they feel shame. Shame triggers stress. Stress triggers cortisol. Cortisol increases cravings for exactly the high sugar, high fat foods you were trying to avoid. So the moral framing doesn't just fail to help, it actively worsens the cycle. The person who falls off the diet and feels terrible about it is now neurochemically primed to eat worse. The person who falls off the diet and feels terrible about it is now neurochemically primed to eat worse. The framing is not just wrong, it's counterproductive. When you frame it as willpower and someone inevitably fails, they feel shame. Shame triggers stress. Stress triggers cortisol. Cortisol increases cravings for exactly the high sugar, high fat foods you're trying to avoid. So the moral framing doesn't just fail to help, it actively worsens the cycle. The person who falls off the diet and feels terrible about it is now neurochemically primed to eat worse. The framing is not just wrong, it's counterproductive. Who benefits from the reframe? If you see it as a systems problem, the solutions look completely different. Instead of have more discipline, you get things like restructuring agricultural subsidies so vegetables aren't more expensive than corn syrup, mandating honest labeling instead of allowing health halos, designing workplaces with adequate break time for actual meals, making cities walkable so daily movement is built into life rather than requiring a gym membership, regulating the food industry's ability to engineer addiction. These are all achievable policy interventions that other countries implemented to varying degrees. The deeper philosophical layer. And this might resonate with your thinking on philosophical instruments. This is really about the illusion of the autonomous, rational agent. The entire willpower framing assumes a self that exists independent of its environment, making free choices in a vacuum. But that self doesn't exist. You are in every moment a product of your context. What's available? What's easy? What's been normalized? What your biochemistry is demanding? Individual self is not as separate from its environment as it believes applies here with uncomfortable literalness. Your choices about food are largely the environment choosing through you. The people who eat well have mostly just recognized this and stopped fighting the system with willpower. They redesign their personal environment, their kitchen, their routines, their defaults, so that the path of least resistance leads somewhere decent. That's not discipline, that's systems thinking applied to the self. Very cool, very cool, very cool. Smoking is coming back, or are the cool kids in Brooklyn are back to smoking cigarettes? Yeah, that's a real trend. But the picture is more nuanced than smoking is back. The stats and the vibes are telling opposite stories. Teen smoking rates are at historic lows, under 3% of high schoolers smoke, down from about a third in the mid to late 90s. New York State just reported youth tobacco use at its lowest level ever recorded. Falls to record low. So by the numbers, decades of public health campaigning worked spectacularly, but culturally, cigarettes are undeniably having a moment. The aesthetic resurgence is real and celebrity-driven. Celebrities like Charlie, Addison Rae, Paul Mescal, Jeremy Allen White, and Rosalia have been prominently photographed smoking. Offered silver trays of cigarettes at their wedding. Pop music is leaning into it. About half of all films released last year included smoking scenes, 10% increase over 2023. How do you embed industry into culture? How do you embed tech into culture? I think this is maybe something weird that is happening with, this is something weird that might be happening with the latest tech. What are you doing with the latest tech sometimes is, what we do with the latest tech sometimes is, we straight up go for the doom scenario. you take a latest tech like Waymo. What movie has just casually, just like one recent, Waymo is out there for more than a year now. It's a magical technology, but what Hollywood movie has casually integrated, just casually had Waymo in their movie, in their story? None. You could have done anything. You don't even have to show it's a Waymo. You don't have to market and stuff like that. You just have to, like, today we saw a photo of a guy who has his like feet out of the window on a Waymo, and he's like inside there playing with his laptop or something. You can have like actress in the actress or the main protagonist of that movie just having her feet out from a Waymo window and just blasting her music and like swiping on her phone or doing something or just reading a book or something. You could have anything. But I think that's the problem. Like Hollywood, or I think that's a problem with tech, or that's a problem with Hollywood. I don't know. But industry has always done something. How do you embed your product into the culture? How do you embed your product into the culture? You are literally paying money. So I think De Beers, the diamonds company, they had this thing with the Hollywood movies that, hey, you have to put a lot of importance on that diamond ring, that a guy kneels down, he proposes to the girl, he spends 2 months of his salary, the girl reacts in a certain way because she's like, oh my God, this diamond ring is beautiful, I have achieved salvation or whatever. And yeah, that was very interesting. It's very interesting. So tech has to do something similar. Waymo is out there for 1 year. Why hasn't Waymo been showcased in a Hollywood movie? Just because that's the way how the protagonist spends their day or spends their time. It's just like smoking. All these tobacco industries are spending money so actors actually smoke in their movie. iPhone does spend money, so iPhone is doing pretty good. Apple does spend money to get the actors to use iPhone and Apple products, but also make sure that the villain doesn't use Apple products. So that's also interesting. But that's it. Like, how do you embed your product into the culture? And if your product is good, if you believe your product is good, embed it into the culture. Offered silver trees or cigarettes at the wedding. Pop music is leaning into it. About half of all films released last year included smoking scenes. Instagram account called Sigfluencers built over 82,000 followers just curating glamorous celebrity smoking images, and its audience skews young women concentrated in New York and London. Sigfluencers. Let's see, Sigfluencers. All right, here we have it. We got Sarah Pigeon. Okay, we got Eric Dane. Eric Dane's photo is here. So this is again very interesting. So Eric Dane passed away, I believe, yesterday or today, and they are embedding that into their concept. Sean Penn smoking inside the Golden Globes venue. You got the royal wedding. You got Kirsten. You got Sophie Moss. Okay. I think some people are not even smoking. They just have the cigarette on. You got Kylie Jenner. Who's this? J. Hutch. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think most people are even smoking. They are just like holding cigarette. Maybe cigarette is so big. They're just like, yeah, we're just gonna have you hold this. You don't smoke, right? But we just want your photo because you are popular in the culture. So just put a cigarette in your mouth. Yeah, that's it. It's built over 82,000 followers, just curating glamorous celebrity smoking images, and its audience skews young women concentrated in New York and London. The anti-tech angle is fascinating. There's a theory that a Gen Z, which has coined derogatory terms for AI, has shown skepticism toward the tech revolution, may view cigarettes, analog, old school, deliberately unhealthy, as a rebellion against the optimization-obsessed, health-tracked, biohacked world they inherited. Optimization obsessed. I think there's a balance. There's a balance to this. There's a balance to this. There's a balance to this. It's a spectrum. Optimization obsessed, health tracked, biohacked world they inherited. Vapes feel like tech products because they are. Cigarettes feel like a deliberate rejection of all that. Even pipe smoking is apparently seeing a revival among young people for similar reasons. Divinity students at Moody Bible College in Chicago are picking up pipes because C.S. Lewis and Tolkien smoked them. I think I know Tolkien. I think he might be an author, framing it as a contemplative and genteel. The social smoker category is expanding. Young adults describe weekend cigarette use as a social ritual tied to drinking, not a daily habit but a party accessory. Boston 25 News, making a comeback among young adults. Some teens are even posting with cigarettes they don't actually smoke purely for the image. Exactly. She knows why cigarettes are cool again. She knows. What does she know? Growing up in Manhattan's Upper East Side, Aitana V remembers being a young girl and not seeing anyone from her school or in her community smoke. We talked about it as something horrible because we were little. Moved the family to Spain. The teen was confronted with a different reality where smoking was largely off the radar. Found that in Europe there's a lot of smoke culture, especially at an earlier age. Now 16 and rounding out the remainder of her high school in Barcelona. Travels home often. It was during one of those recent trips back home that the native New Yorker came face to face with a surprising shift. A lot of teens were smoking. I was under this impression that it was just a thing that was more common among teenagers in Europe. It's actually crazy to see how much it's become something in New York too. The new normal. I see smoking a lot, especially in TV shows targeted for my generation, Gen Z. Or if it's no longer taboo. Because they start to disregard all the negative things they have heard about it and start thinking that it looks cool. Behavioral scientist sees a spike in depictions of smoking a real threat. Undo years of progress in bringing down smoking levels among youth. Tobacco imagery on screens causes youth tobacco initiation. We knew this from early research on movies and now we know it's true for streaming shows too. Youth are 3 times more likely to start vaping when exposed to tobacco imagery. I think this is the weird thing, right? Like it's like there are all these movie actors and stuff. They have a lot of money. They are into arts. In art, you're supposed to be, you're kind of like playing with things and all that stuff, and you look cool. Now people want to look cool, so now they do it. So it's kind of weird. Like, yeah, like all these actors, actresses, they are really old. They might not be smoking all the time. Maybe they are smoking, but they might not be smoking all the time. They're doing for this movie so that it looks cinematic. It's an art project. You're supposed to be playing. You're supposed to be pushing boundaries. You're supposed to be, yeah. But people then take it literally that, oh, this is how this person spends their time all the time. Lights camera addiction. How persistent on-screen tobacco imagery continues to fuel nicotine addiction among young audiences. Pop culture as mirror. We had really done a lot of great work fighting efforts to glamorize smoking. Now we're seeing an increase, especially in streaming shows, where smoking is portrayed not just by villains or troubled characters, but as an everyday behavior. What teens are saying. What is happening in contemporary society? You want to look cool? You don't want to have your hands empty. Alcohol doesn't resonate as much with younger audiences, so if you don't drink, what are you going to do? Trending content on phenomena such as drunk cigs, a Gen Z term for smoking while under the influence of alcohol. It's not pushing the drug on you, explains da 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 da. Interesting. Okay. It's cigarette as accessory, cigarette as signifier, more than cigarette as addiction. Signifier. England is actually seeing statistical movement. Smoking rates in England rose 10%. So it's not purely aesthetic there. It's surging statistically, but culturally it's back on the radar, and for a generation fluent in irony, aesthetic, and image that matters. Public health experts are worried because the playbook is familiar. Imagery influences behavior, and the glamorization now could become the addiction statistics 5 years from now. The cycle that took decades to break could restart through Instagram and music videos faster than anyone expects. Wow. Tell me more. Systems thinking. This idea that the most effective form of self-improvement isn't strengthening your will but redesigning your defaults has implications far beyond food. The core insight is architectural. You are not a fixed agent navigating a neutral environment. You're a dynamic system that responds to its context with predictable patterns. Once you accept that, the question shifts from how do I become someone with more discipline to how do I build an environment where the version of me that shows up at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, tired, depleted, running on fumes, still ends up doing roughly the right thing. That's a fundamentally different project. One is about transforming the self. The other is about designing the container that the self operates within. Designing the container. What this looks like in practice is deceptively mundane. You don't keep junk food in the house. Not because you're virtuous, but because you know the friction of having to leave the apartment is enough to stop most impulse eating. You put your running shoes by the door. You set your phone to grayscale after 10 p.m. You batch cook on Sunday so that the Wednesday version of you who has zero motivation to cook has a ready-made option that's better than delivery. You delete the apps that drain you. You arrange your physical space so that the things you want to do more of are visible and easy, and the things you want to do less of require effort. None of this is heroic. That's the point. Heroism is not a sustainable operating model. The deeper principle is about humility. Systems thinking applied to this self requires you to abandon the flattering narrative that you are a rational, autonomous agent who simply needs to decide to be better. You have to look at your own behavior the way an engineer looks at a process, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Where are the failure points? What are the environmental triggers? What does the data actually say about when and how I break down? That requires a kind of ego death. You have to stop identifying with the idealized version of yourself and start working with the actual one. This connects to something deep in Vedantic thought, the idea that the ego self, ahamkara, that believes in it's in control, making free choices, is largely an illusion. The Bhagavad Gita talks about how the gunas, the fundamental qualities of nature, are what actually drive action, and the ego merely claims ownership after the fact. Systems thinking arrives at a remarkably similar conclusion through a completely different door. Your choices are largely the output of prior conditions, environmental inputs, and biological states. The person who chooses to eat well at 9 p.m. didn't exercise superior willpower. They set up the system at 10 a.m. on Sunday when they had their cognitive resources to think clearly. Where this gets really interesting is identity. Most self-improvement culture is built on identity narratives. I think this is also very interesting. I think there was this one guy who was analyzing video of Austin Butler, I believe that's the actor, and he's really fit. And he's posting videos of doing weird things. He's posting videos of doing weird things in the gym. And he's like, I'm a personal trainer. Would I recommend one of my clients this kind of exercise? No, I have no idea what this exercise is giving to him. And in the 45 minutes or 1 hour that my client has, this is a waste of time. But the difference is, number one, this is an actor. This is their identity. They're constantly searching for things to do in health. They have a lot of time. Their identity is that they are a fit person and they want to be just spending all their time on doing this. So you can't beat that. You can't beat that. So, which was very interesting. Like, what you have to truly change is your identity. It doesn't matter what you do. If your identity is that you're a fit person, you will end up doing everything around that. You'll end up doing everything around that. To your morning, most self-improvement culture is built on identity narratives. Become the kind of person who. But system thinking suggests that identity is more of an emergent property of your environment and routines than a cause of them. You don't meditate because you are a meditator. You become meditator because you put the cushion in a place you can't ignore. Attach the habit to your morning coffee and remove the phone from your bedroom so there's nothing else to do in those first 10 minutes. Yeah, I think this is very interesting. I removed the phone from my bedroom, but the problem is those first 10 to 15 minutes that you go to bed, I think that's the time when ideas hit my brain. There are a bunch of ideas that hit my brain. And that's the moment when I'm like, oh shit, I gotta wait. But that's also good. Like, these ideas are hitting my mind, but I'm like, I want to document them. So I wake up, I come out, I document it, and I'm like, okay, now go back to sleep again. So that is interesting. Remove the phone from your bedroom so there's nothing else to do in those first 10 minutes. Identity crystallizes out as the system has been running for a while. It's output, not input. The limit of this approach is worth naming too. Pure systems thinking can become mechanistic, treating yourself as nothing but an optimization problem, a machine to be tuned that can strip out meaning, spontaneity, the irrational things that make life worth living. There's a version of this that becomes its own trap. The person who has optimized every environmental cue, every default, every friction point, and has engineered a perfectly efficient life that feels hollow because it was designed by their prefrontal cortex for a person who also has heart, body, and need for chaos. Wow. Is that true? Do humans have a need for chaos? The real art is using systems thinking as scaffolding, not as the house itself. You build the structure so that it supports the life you want, and then you live inside it with some wildness. The kitchen is stocked well, the shoes are by the door, the phone is in the other room, and within that container you are free to be fully, messily human. That's maybe the most honest version of freedom, not the absence of structure, but the presence of structure you choose. Yes, though chaos might not be the most precise word, what humans seem to need is unpredictability, a certain amount of disorder, novelty, and uncontrollability in their lives. The evidence for this comes from multiple directions. Sensory deprivation research is maybe the most direct evidence. In the 50s and 60s, studies at McGill put people in environments with minimal sensory variation, uniform sound, diffused light, limited touch. Within hours, subjects became anxious, began hallucinating, and experienced cognitive deterioration. Whoa. Your brain doesn't just tolerate stimulation, it actually requires a certain bandwidth of unpredictable input to maintain coherent functioning. Remove the chaos and the mind generates its own, which suggests the need is deep, not superficial. Chaos keeps your brain alert. Chaos kind of keeps your brain alert. The right amount of chaos keeps your brain alert that what are you supposed to do? The exploration exploitation trade-off from behavioral science points to the same thing. Every organism faces a tension between exploiting known resources, safe, predictable, efficient, and exploring unknown territory, risky, chaotic, potentially rewarding. Evolution didn't resolve this tension by eliminating the drive to explore. It kept both. You're wired to seek novelty even when your current situation is perfectly adequate. Dopamine doesn't just reward pleasure, it rewards surprise, physically the gap between expected and actual outcomes. Your neurochemistry literally incentivizes encounters with the unexpected. Boredom itself is evidence. If humans were purely optimization seeking creatures, a perfectly predictable environment that met all needs would be paradise. Instead, it's hell. Boredom is a signal. It's your system telling you that entropy level is too low. You need disruption. People in hyper-controlled, hyper-predictable environments. Think of certain retirement communities, corporate environments, or even relationships. Report a specific kind of suffering that isn't about deprivation or of any material need. Everything is fine, and yet something essential is missing. Wow. Something essential is missing. Risk-taking behavior that defies rational self-interest is everywhere. Extreme sports, gambling, recreational drugs, affairs, quitting stable jobs to travel, picking fights. A lot of human behavior makes no sense under a pure optimization model. It makes perfect sense if you factor in a genuine appetite for disorder. Nassim Taleb's concept of being anti-fragile is relevant here. Some systems don't just tolerate volatility. They need it to function and grow. Bones need impact stress, muscles need strain, immune systems need exposure to pathogens. The psyche may need a certain amount of chaos for the same structural reasons. The phenomenology of flow states add another layer. Csikszentmihalyi's research showed that the state of peak human experience, flow, occurs not in comfort or predictability, but right at the edge of one's capacity, where the outcome is genuinely uncertain. Too much order and you're bored, too much chaos and you're anxious. The sweet spot is the boundary between the two. That's where people report feeling most alive, which implies that the chaos component isn't just tolerated, it's a necessary ingredient of the experience. This is again really cool. It's not about challenge, it's also about order. If you have too much order, you're bored. If you don't have any order, that's too much chaos. You're anxious. You're gonna be right in the middle, sweet spot. Which implies that the chaos component isn't just tolerated, it's a necessary ingredient of the experience. There's a Nietzschean thread here too, and you'd probably appreciate this. Nietzsche's famous line about needing chaos within to give birth to a dancing star wasn't just poetry. His whole philosophy pushes against the idea that the good life is the orderly life. The Apollonian drive towards structure and clarity is only half the picture. The Dionysian drive toward dissolution, intoxication, and boundary breaking is equally fundamental. Structure and clarity is only half the picture. Dionysian drive toward dissolution, intoxication, and boundary breaking is equally fundamental. A life that's all Apollo, all structure, all optimization, all systems thinking becomes sterile. You need the Dionysian disruption to keep it alive. Where it gets uncomfortable is that this need for chaos doesn't have a clean moral valence. The same drive that pushes someone to travel alone through an unfamiliar country also pushes someone to blow up a stable relationship for no articulable reason. The same appetite for disorder that produces great art also produces self-destruction. The need is real, but it's not inherently wise. It's more like hunger, a signal that can be fed well or fed badly, but can be eliminated. Humans think of chaos, but what they specifically need is contact with the uncontrolled, experiences where the outcome isn't predetermined, where the self is at some degree of risk, where the world pushes back in ways you didn't script. Without that, something in the psyche begins to atrophy. The challenge, and this loops back to the systems thinking, conversation, is building a life that's structured enough to be sustainable, but porous enough to let the chaos in where it matters. Tell me more about this Nietzschean concept of Apollonian and Dionysian. drive. Wow. WisprFlow got Nietzschean, the spelling of Nietzschean right. This is crazy. We started from rice cooker industry overview to now we are into Nietzsche. Amazing work. Amazing work. We'll also go and quickly get the timestamps from yesterday, which was amazing. We had beautiful sun and we just made it happen. That's what we gotta do. All right, let's go. This comes primarily from Nietzsche's first major work, The Birth of Tragedy, which he wrote when he was only 27 and still a classics professor at Basel. It's one of those ideas that started as a theory about Greek art and ended up becoming a framework for understanding human existence itself. The origin story matters. Nietzsche was trying to answer what seemed like an academic question. Why did Greek tragedy, arguably the highest art form the ancient world produced, emerge when it did, and why did it die? His answer turned into something far more ambitious than literary criticism. He identified two fundamental drives in Greek culture, named after two gods. Apollo represents form, individuation, clarity, boundaries, and beautiful illusion. Think of sculpture, a perfectly defined human body frozen in idealized form, each contour distinct. Apollonian art gives you the world as something you can comprehend, categorize, hold at a distance, and admire. Is a dream state, vivid and compelling, but contained. Language, logic, visual art, architecture. Okay, by the way, I keep getting distracted by Claude does produce a lot of timestamps, so we need to cut it. How much? Ooh, cut by 20%. Cut 20%. A few moments worth turning into standalone essays. We build a god of intelligence on a god of plumbing. A clean thesis on why AI displaces knowledge workers first. We have stopped our own growth on how technologies get deliberately undistributed. You don't need to replace them, just make their behavior visible. Capture, complicate, extract, defend, the universal monopoly skeleton. Capture, complicate, extract, defend. Avidya is the root of manufacturer dependency. This was very, very interesting stream. Okay, and then we'll also run the titles, and let's get back. All right. Nietzsche was trying to answer what seemed like an academic question. Okay, Apollo. Apollonian art gives you the world as something you can comprehend, categorize, hold at a distance, and admire. It's a dream state. Vivid and compelling, but contained. Language, logic, visual art, architecture, the principium individuationis, the principle that separates you from me, this from that. All Apollonian. It's a drive that says there are boundaries, there is order, things are distinct and knowable. Dionysius represents dissolution, intoxication, the collapse of boundaries, primal unity, ecstasy, and terror. Think of music, not a composed melody, but the overwhelming experience of being inside sound that obliterates your sense of self. Not a composed melody, but the overwhelming experience of being inside sound that obliterates your sense of self. The Dionysian experience is what happens in ritual. in collective frenzy, in the moment where you stop being a separate individual and feel merged with something larger. It's a recognition that underneath all the Apollonian categories and boundaries, reality is a churning, undifferentiated, chaotic flux, what Schopenhauer called the will. The Dionysian strips away the illusion of individuality and confronts you with raw, amoral, terrifying energy underneath everything. Nietzsche's key move was arguing that you need both. Pure Dionysian experience would be unbearable. Imagine staring directly into the fundamental meaninglessness and chaos of existence with no filter. Cultures that go fully Dionysian tend toward what he called barbaric ecstasy. Total dissolution. You lose yourself entirely and never come back. Pure Apollonian experience, on the other hand, is sterile. Beautiful surfaces with nothing underneath, perfect form, drained of vitality. You get clarity at the cost of everything that makes life feel real. Greek tragedy was for Nietzsche the perfect synthesis. The tragic hero on stage is Apollonian, a distinct individual with a name, a story, clear visual form, but the chorus behind them is Dionysian, a collective voice, merged, musical, representing the primal ground from which the individual emerges and to which they will return. When the hero is destroyed, when Oedipus falls, when Antigone dies, you experience the Dionysian truth that individual existence is fragile, temporary, and ultimately consumed by forces beyond its control. Through Apollonian form, when Oedipus falls, when Antigone dies, you experience the Dionysian truth. The individual existence is fragile, temporary, ultimately consumed by forces beyond its control. Through Apollonian form, structured narrative you can witness without being annihilated by it. Tragedy lets you look at the abyss, but through a frame. The perfect synthesis. Musical representing the primal ground from which the individual emerges, into which they will return. What killed tragedy, according to Nietzsche, was Socrates. This is one of his provocative claims. He argued that Socratic rationalism, the idea that everything can be understood through reason, that knowledge equals virtue, that the world is ultimately logical and comprehensible, was a kind of hyper-Apollonian overcorrection that drove out the Dionysian entirely. Euripides, under Socratic influence, started writing tragedies where characters explain their motivations rationally. The mystery, the primal terror, the music all drained away. What replaced tragedy was philosophy, science, and eventually the entire Western rationalist tradition. Nietzsche saw this as a catastrophic loss, not because reason is bad, but because reason alone can't sustain a culture. It produces what he would later call the last man, someone perfectly comfortable, perfectly safe, and perfectly dead inside. The relevance beyond art is where this gets powerful. Nietzsche wasn't really writing on theater, he was writing about how civilizations and individuals manage the fundamental tension of being alive, the tension between the need for meaning, structure, and identity, and the underlying reality of that all of that is, at some level, a constructed illusion beyond, imposed on chaos. Every major human system can be mapped onto this tension. Religion gives Apollonian structure, doctrine, ritual, moral law. To Dionysian experiences, the numinous, the mystical, the overwhelming encounter with the sacred. A relationship is Apollonian scaffolding, commitment, routine, shared narrative around a Dionysian reality, desire, vulnerability, the terrifying unknowability of another person. Even your own identity is an Apollonian story you tell about a Dionysian process. The actual flux of your consciousness, your contradictions, your drives that don't fit the narrative. The connection to what we were discussing is direct. Systems thinking applied to the self is Apollonian. It's imposed structure, designing defaults, engineering your environment. The need for chaos we talked about is Dionysian, the part of you that requires contact with the uncontrolled, the unscripted, the genuinely alive. Nietzsche's insight is that neither drive is the right one. The art of living is in the tension between them, building structure that serves life rather than suffocating it, letting in enough chaos to keep the structure from becoming a tomb.